Welcome all to today's workshop that is hosted by the Emerging Payments Association Asia, together with the Asia Pacific Financial Forum. And I'm Camilla Bullock, I'm the CEO of EPAA, and I have the pleasure of leading this workshop today. It's nothing like setting the scene with some powerful words and that upbeat motivational music. We're here to talk about open data and the future financial inclusion, and how that can increase access for SME and MSMEs to financial services that supports them in conducting cross-border trade. But before so, most of you have come across the Emerging Payments Association Asia before, but if you don't know, we are the peak body leading the community of our members, anybody who moves money or are supporting the movement of money. And then we're talking really from big banks to PayTax, to the rails, to platform and any other supporting services. And we talk with a unified voice into regulators and policymakers to enhance the industry. And we have a vision of improving lives everywhere through payments. And in the middle of that really sits our advocacy work. And what we've done across the region and globally has earned us seats in different, I would say, some of the most important forums in financial services. We work alongside the Financial Stability Board around cross-border payments in their task forces. But we also have the pleasure, since a few years back, leading this working group for the Asia Pacific Financial Forum, which feeds into ABAC and then also to the APEC finance ministers. So before I'm setting this in further, we're going to hear a few words from Mr. Kubaka-san, who is leading the work and is the chair of Asia Pacific Financial Forum. So Mr. Kubaka-san Danji, I always struggle with pronunciation of names, so sorry about that. Could I ask you to open today's workshop with a few words?
Distinguished participants, colleagues in the APEC Business Advisory Council, collaborator in the Asia Pacific Financial Forum, our co-organizers in the Emerging Payments Association Asia, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. On behalf of the ABAC and APFF, I'm pleased to welcome you to this webinar, which will discuss ABAC recommendations on open data system in our region, with particular focus on their importance for micro, small, and medium enterprises. Open data systems need to be designed to fit the specific conditions in each market. At the same time, they also need to be based on commonly agreed principles to avoid our region's fragmentation into isolated digital islands. Last year, ABAC collaborated with the industry, public sector, and international organizations to develop guiding principles that can help us achieve interoperability, promote trusted sharing of data, provide an enabling regulatory framework, build the need infrastructure, and foster education for consumers, practitioners, and regulators. Let me highlight the most important features of these guiding principles. We stress the importance of a whole of economy approach, which will involve collaboration among public agencies and industrial sector, and between public and private sectors. International interoperability will require collaborations among public and private sectors and international standard settings body. We emphasize the importance of enabling expanded, trusted, and secure sharing of data through a toolbox of mechanisms, common principles of privacy protection, and promoting the adoption of privacy enhancing technologies. We call for a centrally organized framework that provides standards, tools, policy, and regulations that are distributed throughout the market to be balanced and flexible. The frameworks require regulators to have a constant communication with businesses, while continuing to ensure consumer protections, fairness, and financial stability. We propose a common identity and authorization framework built on a digital ID platform as an important foundation of an open data ecosystem. We also highlight the need to develop a sufficient foundational infrastructure, including telecommunications and digital and financial infrastructure. We emphasize the importance of customer centricity, ensuring the solutions developed by industry are useful to consumers. It is also important to create an efficient and competitive market environment that can enable innovation in the open data ecosystem beyond the banking industry. Finally, we highlight the first proactive consumer education and communication to address concerns and promote trust in the open data system. Second, the importance of developing human resources for open data system. And third, promote deeper understanding of regulators. This webinar seeks to explore the role of open data to promote financial inclusion and expand access to finance for MSMEs, and particularly to facilitate their ability to play a greater role in the Asia-Pacific cross-border trade. We hope that our discussions today will help APEC finance officials as they discuss our guiding principles, together with other insights from the work of multilateral and public institutions under the Finance Minister's Open Finance priorities this year. We also hope that they can provide useful information to policymakers, regulators, and other stakeholders on how we can cooperate in ensuring that APEC succeeds in hardening digitalization to achieve the regional integration and prosperity of all member economy. Before I conclude, on behalf of ABAC and APFF, let me thank once again our value co-organizer, the Emerging Payments Association Asia. I also wish to express my sincere thanks to all moderators and panelists for generously sharing with us their precious time and expertise, and to help advance on this journey. Finally, I thank all participants for joining us today. I wish us all a very interesting, successful, and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kapasa, and also thank you for the trust in letting EPA leading this, what I would say, without being biased, probably the most important working group under the APFF. And why I'm saying that is not for the work we do, but how the discussion around data comes back in all other working groups. And we hear it over and over again, that data is the new oil in our economy. And with great power comes great responsibility, to borrow some words from Marvel and Spider-Man. But I think that we've done this now for several years. We started and talk about open banking. Then we rolled over with the definition around open banking. We rolled in and talked about open finance and the relationships between open banking and open finance. And now the last couple of years, as Mr. Kasak said, we've been talking about open data and guiding principle for those frameworks. And when we put the guiding principle forward last year, as just been talked about, they were well received. And I think that Dan can share them within the chat for anybody who hasn't had access to them. But the ask was really this, what Mr. Kupak-san just referred to, ask for further education and understanding and use cases. And what we then done within the Emerging Payments Association, we applied this to something that we are so passionate about, and not just payments, but trade. And what we say over and again is that there is no trade without payments. There is no payments without a movement of data. And there is so many challenges around data today. We have an overflow of data, but how can we use it in a secure manner to be innovative with this data and to create more prosperity globally and in our region through trade? We know specifically in our region how important SMEs and MSMEs are for prosperity, and hence we're applying our principle of today's discussion on those two. Before we go into the panel discussions, we're also going to hear from Nelixa Devlukia, who is our ambassador within EPAA. She's also the chair of the Open Finance Association in Europe.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the EPA APFF Open Data Workshop. It's my pleasure to be here with you virtually today, where we will be discussing the transformative power of open data and why it's more than just a buzzword. It's a catalyst for positive change in our society. So let's start with a quick recap of what is open data. Simply, it's the concept that data should be accessible in multi-directional flows across market participants. Open data encompasses a wide range of information, from financial data, government-held data, and health data, all the way to weather data and scientific research findings. We have in many jurisdictions seen a limited version of open data in open banking. I say limited because this is a single data set, current account data, and we are now seeing moves to expand this in the UK and the EU to open finance, so that access is permitted to a wide range of financial services data. Open data encompasses data beyond financial services. So, why is open data beneficial? If properly designed, an open data system can enable competition and empower innovation. It can enable better consumer outcomes and provide an ecosystem for fintech firms to collaborate with banks and other service providers. When supported by digital enablement and access, open data can also promote financial inclusion in developing countries. I touched upon three things there: competition and innovation, better outcomes, and financial inclusions. So taking this in turn, competition and innovation. Open data fuels innovation and economic growth. By providing entrepreneurs, researchers, and developers access to valuable data sets, we unlock the potential for new products, services, and insights. Startups can leverage open data to create apps that improve financial services, public transport, health outcomes, or even educational resources. Researchers can use open data to advance scientific knowledge and address pressing societal changes. The possibilities are endless when data is easily accessible and usable by all. The second point I made was better outcomes. Open data promotes collaboration and problem solving. By breaking down silos and sharing information across sectors and disciplines, we can tackle complex problems more effectively, whether it's combating climate change, addressing public health crises, or promoting sustainable development. Open data enables collaboration amongst diverse stakeholders, leading to a more informed decision-making process and better outcomes for society as a whole. And then the third point, financial inclusion. Open data can benefit informed, evidence-based policy making aimed at promoting financial inclusion. Regulators can use data on financial access, usage, and barriers to entry to identify gaps in the financial system and develop targeted interventions to address them. So, in conclusion, open data is not just about bytes and algorithms. It's about empowering individuals and driving innovation. It's about building a more transparent and equitable world. Embracing open data principles and practices, we can unlock untold opportunities for progress and create a future where information is truly a force for good. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and enjoy the workshop.
Thank you very much, Nelixa. I definitely could not have said it better myself. It's a hard topic. It's not easy to talk about this, and it doesn't go fast. But with what Nelixa have said, the prize is so big. So let's kick off this discussion. And I'm delighted to have Harriet Duff as our moderator today. Harriet is an expert and a passionate believer in open data, smart data, and consumer data rights.
So for our first panel, I'm delighted to have with me Holly Dorber from PayPal, Risa Cristanto from Monai, and Deanne Chondronegro from Griffith University. And if I've pronounced anyone's name wrong, I'm very sorry. And so we'll be discussing today sort of like a first part of the hypothesis here, that regulation frameworks like fraud, AML, and CTF slow down and sometimes prevent regulated organizations from conducting cross-border trade with MSMEs. So to kick us off, it would be great to just hear a sentence from each of you on your relationship to this topic. Could start with you, Holly, and then go Risa and Deanne.
Great. Thank you so much, Harriet, and thank you to everybody for having me here today. I think in a sentence, what is my relationship to this topic? In my day job, I work for PayPal, look after government relations and public policy, but have also recently taken on the role of president of the Australian Services Roundtable. And it's really in that capacity that I think there's the most relevance to this conversation. We look very much at services trade and establishing consistent global digital trade rules throughout APAC, but also globally. And one of the big issues that we face when we're thinking about trade rules and cross-border trade, which is really just another word for commerce across borders, is how do we encourage greater participation and inclusion of micro, small and medium enterprises, and how do regulatory frameworks which exist for the purpose of protecting the safety, security and confidence of the financial system sometimes impede inclusion for MSMEs. And so that's the sort of angle that I'm coming at today for my participation. So thanks for having me and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, again, thank you and morning everyone. So I think in one of the also important aspects I need to cover will be, how we can build some, robust and comprehensive KYC and how we're going to use the alternative data to, speed up all the process, build more trustable information, and also, how we can build some best tool in terms of transaction monitoring, between the market, and also not to mention the technology and innovation that can help to, build more effective and fast process and also very efficient way, again, to support all these cross-border trade, especially for the SME market. So I think those areas will be one of the key areas that we also need to cover during the discussion. Okay.
Hi everyone, thanks. I'd like just to follow from Holly and Riza about the use of technology. So I research and teach in the area of AI, especially the use of responsible AI and the appropriate data governance to make sure that we can do innovation within and outside of single organizations. Given the challenge, I suppose, with the complexities to navigate through the AML and CFT regulations, for example, to do cross-border trade, there is an opportunity for AI, especially the use of machine learning and advanced analytics, to be a powerful tools to address these challenges around efficiency and the accuracy for compliance. Last but not least, I think I'd like to highlight that AI can potentially help with regards to navigating the complexity to do cross-border trade while maintaining the integrity at the same time. So for example, by doing some predictions as well as detections and finding important opportunities where we can support the participation for all MSMEs in the global economy. Thank you.
Great, thanks all. Some very different perspectives as well. So to start sort of getting into this hypothesis, it'd be great to get a sense of what these barriers to trade can look like in practice. So Risa, is this something which you have experienced in Indonesia? And if so, what are some of the implications of limiting cross-border trade with MSMEs in your experience?
Yeah, so I think I'll give you one example. Recently we also see, in terms of business information, like in case there's a foreign company who would like to do some business with, local company, they need to find some reliable, business information company who can provide comprehensive report. And so currently it takes like 5 to 7 days, and all the process is still manual. So I think some of the challenges, I think we need to focus on. The first one is the comprehensive KYC, how we can build some digital identity, across the market or across the region. But again, sometimes the challenge in the regulation is, we're not trying to build some stringent KYC process that, again, it's going to slowing down. But again, how we can have this common regulation, because we see some of the challenges. I'll give you an example that, for example, like in Philippines, right? The national ID is not standardized, which is quite different with Indonesia at the moment, and that's why how we use the alternative data, like the telco score will be more stronger than the other information. There is still some challenges in the market, how we can do some common regulation to have a better tools to do some robust and also comprehensive KYC. And to mention also the recession monitoring, because one, we're trying to grow this cross-border trade within SME. There's also open some challenges in terms of how we can, some monitoring on the fraud and also the CFP within the region. So I think those are some of the challenges. But I think Indonesia, we've done some good work. I think the government, they impose a lot of new regulation in terms of data privacy. And I think the role of a credit bureau and also alternative data company in Indonesia has been supporting, a lot of progress in terms of providing the standardized information and also, build some trustable company who can provide some easy access to some of the foreign company for doing business in Indonesia.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So it really is the importance of getting that standardized information. It's sort of the key role.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine if you can speed up process from currently like 5 to 7 days within like 30 minutes? I think that will be major changing. If we can speed up and give some trustable and fast process, especially to validating some of the SME within the region.
Yeah, thank you. And so, Diane, you've done a lot of work looking at the flow of information between organizations, and when we're hearing from Risa there, like that it takes a long time and too long for that information to flow. But what are some of the real challenges faced in providing the required information across borders to meet regulatory frameworks like AML, CTF?
Thanks, Harriet. Obviously, the key here is what we talked about earlier is about this monitoring, right? And the whole notion about if we already standardize the flow of information and infrastructure for data provision, then the next thing is obviously how to speed up the process. Essentially, what Risa said is about the checking. So potentially through the use of standardized data as well as the machine learning techniques, we can look at ways of which we can do automation of the monitoring, also reduce the false positives, essentially, right? So what we don't want is to process unnecessary potential things to look at. And importantly, AI is capable of enhancing this data sharing and interoperability because it can harmonize various standards. So if you imagine it, we have the AML CFT compliance requirements across different regulations across the different borders. I think it will be very important to support it in a way that is to do with shared data in a secure way. So one technique is, for example, we can do federated analytics. So we are looking at ways of which we can do centralized data analytics without necessarily transferring private and confidential information from the sources itself. So AI can also help us to extract only the necessary information needed for checking transactions, so to speak, rather than unnecessarily deploying as well as transferring private and sensitive information.
So there are specific challenges there related to consent and privacy, would you say, which need to be overcome?
And because of that, AI is enabling, because not everything that can be checked by the users and the end users and the consumers, so to speak. So it's very important that we enable AI as almost like a proxy to enable this sort of protection of consumer information, most importantly, and also some of the unnecessary information. Keep on saying unnecessary because there's this customer due diligence as well as know your consumer kind of processes, right, needed. But beyond that, I think we should not disclose or transfer information unnecessarily.
Yeah, great. And Holly, I'm keen to bring you in as well. And kind of coming back to our hypothesis a bit, like, what is it about the regulatory frameworks that makes it so hard to conduct trade? Because it's not just a case of sharing data from A to B, is it?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, even just listening to the introductory remarks from the workshop this morning. We typically tend to think, certainly in our payments world, we think about open data very much in the context of open banking. But actually what we're talking about is a much broader movement of information, and in this case specifically, movement of data across border, which is obviously very fraught. But necessarily when we're thinking about open banking and open finance now, we tend just to think about the frameworks governing the movement of that data. But actually in the context of the hypothesis that we're discussing, it actually touches on so many areas of really hot topic public policy regulatory development at the moment. So Diane was just talking about AI. How does AI policy development play out in this space? We've mentioned privacy, we've mentioned digital identity, cybersecurity is another one. Obviously, AML/CTF frameworks are also critical. And I think the interesting challenge here is that everybody agrees all of those are absolutely critical frameworks that need to exist and operate well in a global economy, because the very purpose that they serve is to prevent bad actors from corrupting the economic activity in the global economy. But then how we think about that in terms of open data really comes back to then the quality and the reliability and the trustworthiness of the open data frameworks, and the data that's being inputted into the system itself really matter and really become the things that are the most important criteria in designing these frameworks, because of the outcomes that they're seeking to regulate. And I think, speaking from an Australian perspective, and I'm sure there's similar experiences in these frameworks around the world, one of the biggest hurdles to the take-up of open banking or consumer data right as we have in Australia really is the reliability of the data that's going in. And so I think starting to think, have a conversation more around what data sets exist and they are therefore comparable and therefore portable in different markets across border that can help address some of these quality and reliability issues, leading to greater trust, which will help SMEs, MSMEs, access the global economy across border. With there are enough challenges around individual identity issues and AML/CTF frameworks. But then when we take that even further to MSME identification frameworks, which are primarily, I might just ask, thank you, just on mute. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought, but it's even more challenging for MSMEs in many ways to participate in the global economy. And a lot of that is due to the regulatory frameworks that apply to larger entities that are looking to support them in doing business. And so issues around debanking are well documented throughout the region. And that typically can typically affect the financial inclusion of MSMEs in growing markets. And so I think the conversation around a much broader concept of open data is really valuable, because you're never going to get harmonization it's never going to be perfectly the same in every market, but where you can go towards alignment and agree that we have reliable
code on the screen.
we can get more closely aligned in these different frameworks, where you can say, well, this is equivalent to this, and so we can build a framework which says in this market, if we've achieved this level of confidence in the data, it can be accepted across border and streamline everything. Because obviously the biggest challenge for MSMEs, if they're exporting or trading with multiple markets, is trying to get their heads around each of the regulatory requirements in those markets. So the more streamlined and simplified we can make it through the use of emerging technology, the better for participation.
Yeah, I think that the importance of sort of the data quality is a really good point to draw out. And you said at the start, Holly, around from your experience at PayPal that this is a gap that you can see, and what do you think are the costs to society of not reducing this friction for MSMEs?
Yeah, so I definitely think this is something we see particularly in the context of the Australian Services Roundtable. And when you think about, I mean, the whole world of trade is something that I think not a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about. Multilateral negotiations around trade agreements might put a lot of people to sleep, but actually there is a lot of excellent work happening as we speak around designing digital trade rules that will govern things like this and help. And the specific purpose is, how do you balance, obviously, the need to have domestic frameworks which protect citizens in their markets with open and free trade, which benefits communities, including small and medium enterprises. And so the barriers that we see in this space particularly is, like I said before, the fragmentation of regulatory obligations and the challenges with, trying to do business in multiple markets, where we're seeing almost in every case more, not less, regulation governing the movement of data across borders is obviously a big part of that. And as I said, it's critical in the context of our hypothesis. But how do we get towards harmonization and not sort of towards regulatory arbitrage, where each different market is trying to win in this space, which creates fragmentation and multiple different obligations that make it challenging for MSMEs to participate, but also for larger businesses that are servicing MSMEs? How do you ensure you're making it easier for them also to do business with MSMEs to access the global market?
Yeah, of course. And I might just open up there in case Risa and Deanne, you wanted to follow that up with any additional comments.
Thanks, Harriet.
Yeah,
sorry, Risa.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Paddy.
Thank you. I just like to briefly mention, this quality of data is very critical, isn't it? In making sure that we got what we can extract from the vast amount of transactional data, as well as the static data set, in that sense, is to make sure that we can select the important data based on patterns and previous lesson learnings in that sense. So that's why I was just going to highlight that that is why open data is so important for us, because we need to standardize the way that this data is represented and structured. Okay.
Yeah, I think I fully agree with Holly, and just to add some, because I think a few years back, also, part of the working group team who discussed on the cross-border report for the Cross Bureau. I mean, this is also now happens on the payment landscape, while, on top of how we can have this common regulation on open data between regions, but also in terms of regulatory point of view, how their willingness to, open and trying to do some initiative on this open data between region. Because again, the initiatives not only build some trustable and reliable information, but also to reduce some costs and speed up the SLA, because definitely it can bring a lot of value, especially for the foreign company to do some cross-border trade, specifically for MSME, because typically, I mean, we don't also, I mean, open data is good, but a lot of data can be also related with cost, this is something we need to balance. Typically, the financial institution or the MSME, they need some, good reliable information, but also in terms of cost, you need to support on this initiative, because typically this company will be considered as a company who also cost sensitive in terms of growing their business between region. Yeah, I think that's for me.
Great, thank you so much all. I think unless anybody has any burning closing remarks they wanted to make, there's some really, really interesting points here. And I think we're already kind of looking very much ahead to the role that open data could play in the space, which is really great to sort of tie everything together. But thank you very much as well. We might sort of move on to the next aspects of our hypothesis as well. So we're next kind of going to discuss more around how the friction in cross-border trade, and we've been touching on this a lot already, but how it could be overcome by access to trusted organization identifiers, and how organization identifiers can be built and made stronger by the use of open data. So a couple of new panelists joining now. So we've got Shrikant Patil from DigiLE and Rahul Shingle from TazaPay. And again, apologies if your names were not said correctly. But as we did before, by way of introduction, could you please each sort of give 1 or 2 sentences on why you're here today and how this topic links to your work? So if we could start with you, Shrikant, and then Rahul.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. And, I heard a lot of exciting statements and insights a few minutes ago for the last few minutes. So very, very energizing session for me here. For me, I've been working with open data for a while. I used to lead open banking practice for a couple of consulting firms in the region. It is one of the topics which is also very close to my heart, because I did a lot of work on the digital identity and the association of open data with digital identity. And today I run a company called DigiLI, which is primarily focused on solving for the asymmetry of data, which is between the borrowers and the lenders, or cross-border trade, or essentially organizations, specifically small, medium enterprises who have a challenge of solving for the asymmetry. And we power this asymmetry through artificial intelligence. So combination of many things, but this topic of open data is extremely close to what we are doing, and totally believe in this, that it will solve a lot of use cases and many challenges.
And Rahul, do you want to introduce yourself and sort of your links to your work?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Rahul Shingle. A lot of familiar faces here, so hi to everyone. I am the CEO of a company called TazaPay. We are a cross-border focused payment company based out of Singapore. We are 100% cross-border only. We support enterprises, mid-market customers, SMBs, to be able to collect money seamlessly from their clients using real-time networks, local payment methods without the need for creating local entities anywhere. We operate as a merchant of record. We are about 4 years old, venture funded. So cross-border is what we enable, and data is always the missing link from a risk perspective, from an AML perspective, from a compliance perspective. So very interested to discuss that topic. I've always been in payments, was at Stripe before this, leading APAC, and prior to that PayPal for 10 plus years. So this topic is quite close to what I do on a day-to-day basis, and experience over the last 15-20 years in this specific topic.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you both for being here today. So to kick us off, Shrikant, it'd be great to get a brief sort of summary of the type of identifiers that exist. And then I'd be really keen to hear what role that you think these identifiers should be playing.
Sure. So, again, when there are multiple thoughts around this. Of course, one of the identifier is LEI, legal identifier. There are digital identities which are coming in. So this particular space is evolving very fast. And one of the things we are seeing, which is very interesting, implementation of digital identity, which is SyncPass, and which is also being replicated across multiple countries, is not only that you have the identifier, but you also have the data association with the identifier. Now, a lot of identifiers today, which we see, are at the national level, and probably LEI it's at only one at the global level, which is what we are seeing. But the association of the information or the data which is around about the entity, and I'm purely talking about entity here. Of course, there are similar challenges exist for the individual. That association needs to be strengthened, and there is a gap today where we could create these kind of identifiers and then create the association. So those should not be thought separately; they should be brought together. Of course, we see a lot of great implementation of digital identities across the world. We should not just stop at individuals. We should roll it out for at the national level for the entities also, and that will be a game changer for a lot of businesses to move transparently and then share the data. We also need frameworks which are going to be the issuer of data, certifier of data. I think Holly spoke about the quality of data before a few minutes ago, and that's essential that we have ability to certify that the data which we are going to use is pure data. Today, one of the big challenges we face in the AI world is that AI is going to run out of data to consume, the pure data to consume, because a lot of new data, which is Gen AI data, is being pushed on the internet. Right? So we have to solve all of these challenges. I don't think there is one solution, but it has to be collaborative. But the cohesiveness between the data and the identity and the identifiers have to be established, not just roll out just the identifier as a concept.
Yeah, thank you. And so, yeah, really important that identifiers are good, but just that one part of the story, and it's the broader data. I think it's really, really useful way of thinking about this. And so, Rahul, keen to bring you in as well. So when you're providing payment services to MSMEs, do you think that these services could be even better and more inclusive if trusted identifiers were better available?
Yes, certainly. One of the big limiting factors of servicing SMBs today is finding a scalable way of onboarding them without getting burnt. This is the challenge for any payment company. We try to do product-led growth where we do self-onboarding and let them come in and manage risk using transaction monitoring models. In markets where there are these open identifiers available and we can verify the legitimacy of the merchant, like Singapore, for instance, you get very little level of fraud because a lot of checks are available. You can do SyncPass and get the data from ACRA. A lot of the similar data is not available in other markets, for instance, in Vietnam or Indonesia, and payment companies find it very difficult to onboard and service those SMBs. And ultimately, for us and for whether it's a marketplace or a payment company, there are 3 or 4 sets of data which are quite important. First of all, you need to establish the merchant is who he or she is claiming to be. Secondly, they are selling what they are claiming to sell. Thirdly, their business is legitimate. And really, the only global open data format that you have is sanction screens, which is one thing which works, but it is so shallow. It's just a name, and most of the time there is a false positive. And with the amount of work us and any other payment company have to do, the amount of manual work in the documents we have to collect is just not commensurate with the day and age we live in. And this is quite a solved problem, I feel, in US and Europe, where common ID parameters are quite easily available. US has VerID and Europe has their own data pools, but especially in Asia Pacific, where the market is so fragmented, it's quite bad. Just taken in India as an example, where the what's popularly known as India 2.0, the Aadhaar stack, has solved the first problem, that you are able to identify who the merchant is claiming to be, but is still very, very difficult to verify. Are they legitimate? Are they really selling what they're claiming to sell? Are they really, can you make sure that they will not do any sort of nefarious activity therein? And for me or any other payment company, that is more important, that first of all, verifying identity, which is increasingly getting easier. But how to identify whether this person is not going to be up to any sort of monkey tricks, I think is the biggest challenge. If I had to list my top 3 challenges, that will probably be one of the top 3 challenges, and do it in a systematic and scalable way.
What might be the other 2 challenges, can I ask?
I mean, the other challenge is more nothing to do with data, but it's about how to keep fundraising at a good pace.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with data, but if that's not the third chat. But yeah, this is we consciously then try and stay away from SMEs, because we are very difficult to find a scalable way of onboarding. There are some companies who've done it well over the years, PayPal and Stripe, for an example. They found out they've got enough scale now to have transaction-based patterns to establish who's okay, who's not okay. But for startups like us, it's quite challenging to be able to do this. And countries wherever, so now when we choose which market to launch in, the first thing we look at is, are there enough identifiers for us and enough markers for us to identify the legitimacy of a merchant that we're going to onboard.
Yeah, thank you. So are there, just kind of building on that, are there some examples or particular countries where there are really good organization identifiers, which are a good sort of example to look to?
I think Singapore is a good example, but it's so tiny a market that it doesn't really move the needle for anybody. But Singapore typically has a lot of good identifiers. You can look at the company database. You can get ACRA reports. You can you have SingPass to verify the identity, and also the framework is such that the legal framework, that if in case the merchant of the business does do something wrong, there are repercussions. Other markets is not the case. It's very difficult to go after these merchants. So I think the countries which have done a real good job and where we feel quite comfortable are Thailand, for instance, where there's enough data available to make a good assessment. Singapore, certainly. Australia, certainly. India is a bit of a mixed bag. You can verify the identity quite easily, but very difficult to identify the real legitimacy of the business and whether this merchant is going to turn rogue or not. But we think, surprisingly, even Vietnam has done quite a good job on this front. There are enough data markers now for us to feel comfortable when we are onboarding customers. Some countries where we still don't feel very comfortable are, for instance, Philippines as an example, or Malaysia as an example. India is always a bit of a 50-50. We are also quite impressed with what's happening in the Middle East, with enough data available there to make to feel comfortable.
Great, thank you. It's always good to sort of get some tangible examples, I think, as well. And just building on some of the things you were saying around like the cost as well, might come back to you, Shrikant, here. Like, how do you see the costs of implementing open data frameworks compared to the money that can be saved or the opportunities that can be opened up?
Let's take simple statistics, right? Today, what Rahul was saying about small, medium enterprises, and we heard that as a echoing sentiment through these sessions. Small, medium enterprises suffer the most because the availability of data. So if you think about, the asymmetry hits them the hardest, right? For the large corporations, it's the data is easily available. People can actually look up these information. They have to publish all the reports. But for small medium enterprises, which could be in the form of proprietors as well as partnership firms and private limited companies, some of them are even listed companies, many of them now getting there. And we see that is an enhanced problem statement. So the benefit, today there is around $5.7 trillion of gap only in the emerging market for the lending, and which could lead to close to around $300 to $500 billion of revenue for the banks and financial institutions, right? So implementing open data can really benefit many ways to organizations. Also the speed at which, so today, even if I talk about mid-size or very dynamic in fintech, which is lending to small medium enterprises, they take roughly a month's time. And one of the important aspects there is that they have to meet people. Now with open data, and we can really optimize some of these, digitize these journeys, and that's exactly what we are pushing for. We believe that artificial intelligence could help work as a co-pilot, not Microsoft Copilot only, but like as a co-pilot in the entire journey for lending, where organizations could leverage the predictive abilities of AI. And I'm not talking about Gen AI, I'm talking purely the traditional AI capabilities, where we could fulfill these gaps and the benefits could be significant. Today, we see that some of these documentations and these the banks have to ask again and again for the credit history, and credit history is again not available for many of them. So lot of challenges in the systems can be mitigated, and it's definitely worth it. What we need definitely though is a regulatory framework around consumer protection about data, because while we see, as Rahul mentioned, we are seeing a lot of proliferation or opening of data across the world, right? We see in the Middle East, many countries are now starting to adopt the credit models, right? There are many countries which are pushing for robust credit models, because first of all, you need to come up with this data and then push for it. So all of these is this really happening very fast. Tremendous opportunities, starting with credit and enabling artificial intelligence. I think those will be benefits which will create significant changes in the transformative abilities of all the organizations.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And we've kind of heard there about quite a lot of different countries, experiences, and things like that. So I'm very happy to kind of open up if there's anyone else listening as well that is either from one of the countries that we might have talked about, or just has a different perspective or a question to share. I'll awkwardly pause so people can jump in.
So Harriet, this is Shalini from India. So I'll just want to, and I've heard Rahul and Shrikant talking about open data, and Rahul's feedback on India is obviously, it's kind of true, because we've covered some ground, but there's a lot that needs to be covered. But in terms of the open data implementation in India per se, so we as a country, is so diverse. We're working with multiple regulators, and it's a country which is huge and has a very graded kind of a population, each at a very different level of financial understanding, digital literacy, right? So in that context, we've already implemented a project for open finance, which is internal to the country, but there is a lot to be for us also to learn and evolve it and take it to open data, as well as for other countries to emulate and learn from the challenges and the experiences we had while implementing it at a huge scale. So like what Shrikant said, open finance in India has been implemented. We have taken a comprehensive approach, though still kept it to a very regulated set of entities. And we have had some very early, impact stories coming in, with cost of processing coming down by 75% in some cases for financial institutions. The fraud related to banking data and financial data has become zero. So that's one thing which is really exciting, because in today's world with digitization, how do you ensure that the data, the statements or the account information that is being submitted is fraud-free, it's not tampered with, and you don't spend endless hours, verifying the authenticity of the data. So all that is one big impact that we are seeing across all financial institutions. And we are just, right now, it's more of an efficiency game, but going forward, as Shrikant was highlighting, we also expect it to increase affordability and accessibility to a large part of the Indian population. And I'll talk about, how we have implemented it as in my part of the panel discussion, but I truly resonate with both what Rahul and Shrikant told, expressed about India as a country implementing it, and as well as the impact open data can bring in for our economy.
If I can, Harriet, if I can just add one point into it, right? While we talk a lot about open data, we largely go in, after the financial data. And what I want to highlight here is that the non-financial data plays a very, very significant role. And the reason I'm sharing this is because when we train our models, we realize that, financial data has certain weight, but non-financial parameters can really create a good profile. So we create a predictive model for the behavior of a company, and then non-financial parameters play significant role. So when we talk about the open data revolution, we should not stop at only financial data. We should also look at data which is promoter, ESG data, social media data, what employee data or customers are saying about it. So I'm saying, like, this is a great beginning for all of us, a great foundation, but we are just getting started.
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. And I think that kind of comes full circle to what we're hearing at the start around the definition of open data that we're using here, and the importance that it's not just open banking that we're talking about, and that's where there's real value in the more cross economy and cross sector data as well.
Can I jump in with a question?
Yes.
As I love everything I'm hearing, thank you everybody for the contributions so far. Does it almost feel like we're sitting in those two things? What should we spend time on? Is it how we can use the data, so more on the regulation space, or is it on the technology space where we spoke about federated analytics in the session before, and this is like, what is the sensitive data, what is not the sensitive data? Because there's one giving people access to the system, and then it's also the other one in everything around making that, if we spoke specific about payments now, but that not having the false positive and the correct data. So the panelists, like, what do you think is the biggest blocker? Is that the regulation piece on around we can use data, or is it the guiding principles how we can use technology more? Do you see where I'm going with this? It's almost two sides of the same coin. So happy to hear comments, because here I'm coming from. This whole workshop is to enrich our guiding principles we're putting forwards. And that will be the next question we're going into. But just for what we've come so far, which of those two is it that we should spend time on?
If I may
I'll
just
go first. That's a great question, Camilla. Thanks a ton for bringing that point out. I think in most places, collecting the data, as you mentioned, is less of a problem because the merchants will not onboard those customers if you don't get that data. In many places, it becomes easier because you can get it from the source of truth. In US and Europe with open banking, you can get their bank statement with their permission. So there's no question of fudging, etc. I think a lot as a practitioner, challenge for us is federation of that data. First of all, availability of data which is tamper proof, I think is the biggest challenge. Once we get that, we are able to federate it. And so I think the bigger challenge is frameworks in place so that it's like ours and Shrikant's and the others are able to get access to this data, which is relatively tamper proof and a single source of truth. Like for instance, open banking does that. Open banking is not only a tool for enabling payments, but also getting the underlying bank statements and financial data. If something like that was available, it will make life much easier for a lot of us. Over to you, Shrikant.
So very quickly, I think, Camilla, the regulation can only play a limited role. I mean, my view here is that the industry has to thrive on the use cases which are going to create these opportunities. For example, banks across the world, DBS, PBVA, OCBC, all of them didn't wait for regulation. And you see the new age digital banks, digital only banks also thrive on the ecosystem play, which is again open banking and open data. So I would say yes, regulation is important more from a consumer protection perspective, but the use cases will actually drive it, because even if there is a regulation and you see, it happened in Australia also that there was a regulation and then banks took more time to implement it. It's happening across the world. So you would realize that unless there is a business case for those banks specifically to offer and make money out of those APIs or whatever they are offering use cases, regulation cannot really propagate open banking. Pure regulation cannot propagate. There has to be a business case.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's one that we're talking about just in the real-time payments as well, cross-border in general. It has to be that the profit-making element to it, or innovation will also stop. But so, Dion, I saw your comments about that with AI, that it has to be trustworthy. So just going to resound my answer before I hand back to Harriet. Sorry, Harriet, I bumped in here.
That's good.
Yeah, just a few comment on that one, Camille. So I think is one of the key player. I mean, so the alternate data actually is quite what can I say? It's like limitless, right? I mean, we can provide with a lot of data, but in terms of regulator, there's always like two approach, right? Whether I mean, if there's no regulation, it means you can try, or second approach, if there's no regulation, so it means you don't do it, right? So how we can ensuring that the validation and reliability of the data, that is first. I think Rahul also made few points on how we stand and get some content, also very important. But one of the key elements that, I mean, bank is, they hunger with data, right? It's onboarding, customer portfolio collection. I mean, all the aspect, fraud detection, they're always looking for data. But the thing is that we also doesn't want to have this garbage in, garbage out, right? I mean, many data that's always good, because we need to validate and ensuring that the data is reliable and also trustworthy as well.
Yeah, it brings back, so my background is data, so I used to sell data to the banks I worked for Thomson Reuters and the banks used to say, like, you charging me for my own data. And I said, yeah, but the data you had wasn't clean, it wasn't trustworthy, you couldn't do anything with it. So I definitely think we've come so far without the data use cases, but we really need to find that how yeah, the balance between the banks and the other participants in the sector, but with the security of the end user as the SME or MSME. Shalini, did you want to say something before I hand over to Harriet to round off this panel?
No, so broadly, the way we have seen it in India is regulations are required to kickstart, but they're more like enablers. So you set up a broad framework within which you set up the rules of the games, but not going at a micro level, keep it very macro, and let the use cases evolve. Like, so in India, for the last 2.5 years, we've seen the regulators taking a very hands-off approach. They have brought in open finance in the country, but they're not just jumping into regulating each and every aspect of it. A lot of new use cases are coming up. And in fact, some of the use cases we hadn't even thought about when the framework was introduced. How could data be used to enhance the well-being of a common, person in the country? And that's where I think the approach the regulators have taken, let's just wait and watch. Initially it let it happen in small groups, let the initial results keep coming in, and along with the impact, you also see the associated risks that come up, and that's when you take action. You also, and their approach has been let the industry regulate itself. So a lot of approach has not been the regulator taking that decision, what is to be done and not to be done. Right now, they're in a phase where they're saying, let the industry come together and define rules for themselves, ensuring that the use cases are not inhibited, at the same time keeping in mind the consumer interest, and they're keeping a close watch. So we know the regulator is there watching how the industry is working, what use cases are coming up, but they're still not in that phase where they want to over-regulate and kill innovation at that stage. So it has to be a balance, and you keep, kind of changing and tilting or, fine-tuning your balance as you move ahead with the evolution.
Yeah, thanks, Shalene. Thanks all. That's a really interesting discussion. I definitely resonate with that from my experience working in the government on open data frameworks in the UK and in Australia. It's around trying to enable rather than prescribe the types of innovation. But in doing so, it's really hard not to bake in certain things which might restrict innovation and uses as you go. So it's that evolving over time that you're saying there. I might just keep us moving, but Shrikant and Rahul, thank you so much, and please do stay part of the conversation as we go through, if you would like. But to try and sort of tie things together a bit more now, which we've already been doing a lot of, but I think we've definitely heard that this is a problem, that the hypothesis is on a right track in terms of regulatory frameworks and are slowing down and preventing cross-border trade with MSMEs, and there's a role there for open data and organization identifiers. So I think in this final sort of session, we were going to turn to more practical next steps and consider how those open data frameworks need to be designed. Again, there's already loads of good points and ideas that have come through. And as was mentioned at the very start, we're keen to build on the open data guiding principles that were produced by the APFF working group last year as well. And because this discussion has been much more focused on trade specifically. So, do those same principles hold, or additional principles needed for the purpose of cross-border trade? To introduce new panelists here, well, Shalini, we've already heard from you, but it's good to have you involved in this conversation as well. We've also got Richard Robinson from Bloomberg and Paul Franklin from Siderius Advisory. So as we did with the previous panels, it'd be great to just hear a sentence or two from each of you on sort of your relationship to and interest in this topic. So maybe we could start with you, Shalini, and then go Paul and then Richard.
So thanks, Harriet, and it's a pleasure to be here, and really great to hear the perspectives of a diverse set of panelists. Like, it just gives us a lot more food for thought for our internal implementation. So I am representing Digi Sehmati Foundation. It's a Section 8 not-for-profit company. We're working as an industry body, which is scaling up the account aggregator framework. which is India's, the framework is introducing open finance in the country. It is a regulated framework, but there was a need for a body to like work at every aspect of that framework to make it really scalable and reach out to the masses. And that's what we do in India. So we are a close ally of the regulators and policymakers in India and making it successful in India.
So Paul Franklin from Sidarius Advisory. I previously was leading the implementation of the consumer data right at the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, and have also worked extensively in payments for many years. Among other things, I was involved in developing Australia's new payments platform. So Sidarius Advisory provides independent consulting services on a range of digital initiatives from data sharing to payments. And I'm really interested in this topic because I do think there are really big opportunities to reduce friction. And just a comment, I think the anti-money laundering framework does aim to have some friction. It's not about stopping all money laundering. Part of the framework is about letting it happen and catching the people who are doing it. But data is key to that. If we know where money is flowing and where it's for legitimate purposes, it allows regulators to also identify where are there non-legitimate cases of financial flows that need to be investigated, and that might actually lead to uncovering an actual physical crime in addition to the financial crimes.
So Rich Robinson from Bloomberg. So my interest in the open data space from my title, I'm actually in charge of our strategy in regards to open data. Bloomberg does support 2 open data standards. One is the LEI, which we've talked about, which is ISO standard. We are the largest LOU, local operating unit, for issuing LEIs globally. The other is the FIGI, which is Financial Instrument Global Identifier. That's a standard of the Object Management Group, and recently also standards of Brazil, as well as a U.S. national standard. So that's for identifying financial instruments and actually a data model for identifying financial instruments. The interesting thing about FIGI is that it actually incorporates the MIT open source license within the standard. And then for LEI, which I think is important, has the global open data policy that they go by. My other interests are in data. I represent Bloomberg on a number of industry working groups and organizations. One of the things which relevant to the payments people probably is I'm co-vice convener of the registration management group for 20022, which is also open data standard. So
great, thanks all. It's really good to have you here. And so sort of kick things off, Shalini, we've already heard a bit from you around like the work that you're doing in India. And it'd be good to just like get into a bit more around like key lessons or principles you think from your experience of supporting trade within India and how they might scale up from within country to sort of that cross-border payments and trade looking forward.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just start with a quick intro of what India has done as a country in terms of open finance. So like I said, open finance, so we had gone beyond open banking. In fact, the central bank has actually opened up open finance in the country with all 4 financial sector regulators, which includes banking, insurance, pension, and securities regulators coming together and supporting a framework and opening up the data to each other. So it is a truly cross-sectoral data. We've not limited the data sets to start with. We've got 15 data sets that are available on this framework. And recently there is a taxation database, which is GSTN, which captures the goods and service tax information related to MSMEs on the database. And in fact, that's expected to be a big enabler for MSME trade and financing in the country, because you have now access to real-time invoicing data of the MSMEs in the country, very crucial to estimate their turnover and do cash flow lending. So all in all, it has been a very broad-based framework. 700 financial institutions have already onboarded the framework. Around 6% of the population in the country, which is 70 million consumers, have already used it. We've seen a disbursement, loan disbursement of around 50 billion USD happened over the last 1.5 years. So all in all, it's been quite successful, big, but in a country like India, where it's still small, we just touched the lives of 5 to 6% of the Indians. And as we move forward, there is a lot more that needs to be covered. We have followed a federated interoperability model. We have unbundled the consent managers. So from a consumer data security and privacy, we've introduced a concept of consent managers who are entirely managing the consents of the customer in a very explicit mode, which is very granular, and that is serving as a digital trail of what a consumer has agreed to. So that is one of the key highlights of this. We are also gradually moving towards open data. Similar initiatives are happening in the health sector, agri sector, but they are at different stages of evolution. We recently passed a Digital Data Protection Act, which will come up with a legal framework for any kind of data exchanges happening in the country beyond the financial sector. And we expect that to be something which will lead to an open data-led economy in the country. I have already spoken about the impact it has created, but 30% of the lending that has happened to the MSME sector. And that was just before goods and service tax was added to this framework. And we expect that to increase significantly as we move forward. So in terms of the early learnings, the way India has built upon is we build a foundational infrastructure step by step. So we started with building an identity, giving an identity for every individual. And it's not just an identity, it is something which can be verified digitally on a real-time basis. And on daily, we are authenticating identity, 100 to 120 million identities in the country for different kinds of flows. And almost 80% of the banking sector today, I mean, the more evolved digital lenders are on digital identity and verification, though there are variances in the adoption. While we have done a lot of work on the consumer identity and individual businesses where the individuals are sole proprietor businesses, there is a lot more work that needs to be done on the entity level identifiers, and that we hope to see as we move forward. Second thing which we have as a lesson and which can be very true even for the open data initiative that we are discussing here is that we've kept it very simple and flexible according to various sectors and consumers. So it's not as if there is one identity, right? India as a country, there were multiple identities which consumers were using. So instead of that approach where everything has to be implemented in one go, we kept it very simple where, the identifiers, there were multiple identifiers that were used to source open data. So for example, phone number, a combination of a phone number, PAN, which is your taxation number in India, and your date of birth was used as a combination to discover and identify and share data instead of making everything linked to Aadhaar, which everyone had, because the databases, source databases also need to be updated with the identifiers. And that was not the case in India. So very graded approach. Like I said, we started with very small use cases rather than just going and doing it at a huge country level scale. So that was the second thing, start with something which is very, very specific to a sector, and broadly then increase, the based on the scale and the risk perception, improve, mechanism to secure the flows. Like in UPI, we saw when we started, it was a single factor authentication with a transaction limit of just 2,000 rupees per day. But as the system grew and scale came in and usage came in, the transaction limit was increased, but we introduced a dual factor authentication for someone to be able to transact digitally. And that's what we are planning to do in the open finance space, data space as well. And another thing was that the entire framework is very consumer centric. So any decision you have to take, the first question, especially we as an industry body ask, is how is it benefiting the consumer and how is it safe, preserving the data of the consumer. And that makes the decision very easy, right? Because there are no ifs and buts about it. You tend to build infrastructure that is serving the end consumers. So some of the challenge, so these are some of the principles, like start with building a foundational infrastructure on identity, which is digitally viable. Keep it small, simple, keep it flexible according to the needs of various countries. Start with low value, small use cases so that you don't kind of expose a large population to it immediately, and you ensure that you can take graded approach to regulation. So broadly, yeah, some of the learnings that I can share.
Yeah, thank you. There was loads there. That was really insightful to share that. And thinking how best to sort of bring this together with the others as well. But I think one aspect you talked about there, as like a key point to highlight, was that federated interoperability model. So Paul, it might be a good sort of think around like how that compares to the experience in Australia as well. And I think interoperability is like one of those key themes that was coming through the principles, the open data frameworks from last year as well. And like, where do you see that real need for interoperability to enable the cross-border payments? Is it about like the interoperable standards or the interoperable technology, or is it even about interoperable regulation, those sorts of things?
Well, I think there's certainly a standards aspect to it, and that's particularly that you need to maintain any data that exists in one ecosystem. You should be able to allow that to flow through to other ecosystems. And there's a few areas where we've had success in Australia. In particular, we launched the new payments platform in 2018 that's now becoming sort of, more on the way to being ubiquitous. And the Treasury has a plan to turn off some of the legacy systems by 2030. So that's a payment system that, because it uses ISO 20022, is capable of carrying through data about each of the parties to the transaction. That's very important. In Australia, we've also recently launched standards to allow connection of cross-border payments into that domestic payment system, so that when a cross-border payment occurs, those can flow into the data can continue all the way through the transaction chain. And I guess for the consumer data right, or for data sharing regimes, you want to make sure that the data that flows through the payment systems can then be reported back to the recipient, either through the bank or through alternative providers. And that work of uplifting payment systems, it's really hard and really slow, and not just to build it, but then to migrate everybody over a period of time. For a system that was launched in 2018, the legacy systems won't be turned off till 2030, but by then you'll have very rich data. So I think there's certainly a role for standards to make sure that you can carry all of the data that you need, and reflecting local variation, but also moving towards global standards as you can. I think there's a role for regulators. You don't necessarily want regulators designing use cases because they might lack a commercial imperative. But when there is a commercial imperative, it's not always the party with the commercial imperative who needs to make the choice to participate. So there is sometimes, I think, a case to mandate certain data elements or certain behaviors when there's a compelling social reason to do so. And I guess it's a slow journey. You can build an ecosystem, but then it's really about the adoption and identifying opportunities to share data. That's really important. And I should mention, while I've mentioned the new payments platform, Australia, like many other countries, has also uplifted our high-value clearing system. So, there's a progressive work towards adopting new standards. I guess the challenge is, how do you preempt what's coming next around the world so that we can make standards somewhat future-proof?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Paul. So it's in future-proofing, it's probably the frameworks remaining flexible to be able to change and take on those new standards as they are developed. And Richard, keen to get you involved too. Like one other theme in the principles from last year was the need for public and private sector collaboration in the design of open data systems. So should this remain a priority for the purpose of better enabling cross-border payments? And what would be key considerations related to this in the design of those frameworks?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, we've mentioned regulation and standards, and a couple of things. First of all, standards are probably misused and misunderstood in many cases because those who are involved in development or that esoteric group that's involved in the creation of a particular standard, anybody from outside tends to think it was built for them, and if it's good enough, they'll shove it in and get it to work. Which, interesting enough, I was having a conversation with a member of one of the Federal Reserve banks last week on this topic, right? Where does regulation come in? Regulation, in a lot of cases, if they don't have that private conversation, the private-public collaboration, even if it's principles-based regulation, it may miss the mark. What are they trying to accomplish? But do they actually understand what the implications are and how that private operation works? What are the processes that are actually going to be impacted as opposed to what they are intending to get? From a private-public cooperation perspective, private companies are where you're going to have the capital in order to build things like standards and contribute the experts to those efforts, right? Especially the larger companies, and hopefully benefiting the SMEs in doing so and bringing them along. But having the public institutions there, they can discuss what are the goals that they're really trying to accomplish. So you're not just building things for competitive advantage purposes, but you're actually building towards public good that has purpose, that is going to encourage adoption, encourage transparency and data quality, while also encouraging competition at the same time. Right? So that's a lot of asks right there, but the only way it can do it is if both the regulators and the public institutions have a proper appreciation and understanding of the private company needs, and the private company needs are aligned with what the public institutions are trying to accomplish in their oversight and attempts. I mean, no one wants to support trafficking money or human trafficking or anything. Everybody in the private world wants to try and prevent money laundering and illicit activities. Just need to cooperate on the tools that they need to build together in order to do those things. And the only way to do that is for those collaborative activities to continue. LEI, right? I mean, a lot of that was built out of discussions between CPM and OSCO and the private sector in discussing how do we go about and solve for this. Unique transaction identifier, unique product identifier in the derivative space. Again, public-private collaboration, a lot of open conversations, meetings together, not things being handed down on high from regulators or private industry running off and saying, here, use this, right? It was working together in order to accomplish those goals.
Yeah, thank you. That all makes a lot of sense. And just sticking with you, Rich, as well, I guess I pulled out public-private partnerships as a key theme coming through, but are there other sort of key principles which you think should be considered when we're talking about this payments across borders, like more broadly?
In regards to public-private partnerships?
Not necessarily, it can be, but just like opening it up based on the conversations today.
Well, again, I mean, the interoperability aspects were already covered, standards, allowing for competitive solutions to be allowable, and not just mandating one thing. So you have things like the RLN is out there, but also you have other payment rails, you have other digital options, you have when looking at these, the focus should be on how do we get these things to interoperate as opposed to picking winners and losers. What works for one jurisdiction or one sector of the market may not work for another. So how do we get them to work together? Actually, the governor of the Federal Reserve banking system gave a discussion at the TC68 plenary I was at, ISO meeting I was at last week. And one of the things about that was how they're revitalizing the federal payment systems, but still enabling, there's 4 different payment systems within the US for different purposes, ACH, FedNow, FedPay, and they all serve different purposes, but they are focusing on interoperating between those in order to facilitate better data quality, faster payments, and more access for the consumers.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm happy to sort of open up Paul and Shalini. I don't know if you've got sort of additional principles or points that you're keen to make. Paul, go to you first.
Yeah, I guess I'd mirror the point that you really need collaboration between the private sector and regulators. There's not, regulators who don't understand the private sector pressures can make misguided choices, but also, sometimes there's a public benefit that needs to be imposed, and those things need to be carefully balanced. But the best thing for an ecosystem where there's a high degree of innovation is to make sure that you've got the right set of facilitating regulations, so you can actually legally do the things that you want to do to innovate, and to make sure that regulations don't impede people who have legitimate innovative solutions to implement. And it's a difficult thing. Every private sector participant has their own views about what's the right solution, and it's not a regulator's role to create a business for somebody else. But there is, I think, a case for private sector participants to engage with the regulatory community to make sure that the issues are understood, and that where there's opportunities for helpful regulation, that those could be taken. When I left the banking sector to go into a regulator, one thing I found was it was just difficult to get people to tell me what they really thought, which was, quite an odd situation.
Yeah, I feel like I can appreciate that, coming from a government background as well. And just to sort of wrap up, I'm just keen to come back to you, Shalini, if you had any other final points that you wanted to make here.
No, so I have already spoken about how regulators need to just get in the enabling framework first, and then leave it to the private sector to innovate. But going as we move forward and as it scales up, there is a need, and the approach we are taking in India currently is embedding policy as a code. In the sense, it's almost impossible, practically impossible for the regulators or even a self-regulatory body to keep a eye on some 15,000 odd financial institutions who will be participating in the pilot, in the open finance project that has been rolled out. We're already at 600. So there is a lot of discussion around how do you embed regulation as a part of the technological processes, the standards and the flow, and any deviation or detection can be done on a real-time basis, starting from simple things like, the parameters of the consent which a customer has given, or a FIU, the financial information user is requesting for, is matching up with a reasonable set of parameters that has been agreed by the industry. So can that be done on a real-time basis? On a real-time basis, someone can just red flag the ones which are potentially deviating from that, and then possibly take some deterrence against those flows, even stop the flows in extreme situations. So a lot of these things need to be automated. Today, we at Sehmati are looking at technology to kind of, ensure that regulations are implemented, and not just doing a post-facto analysis of what went wrong. In fact, a lot of the discussion around AI, which happened on this group, may be very relevant in implementing these kind of flows. But that's where we are aiming for as we move forward. It may take a few years, but that's the direction we have taken as a country.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much all. I might just at this moment, and again, keen for people to stay involved in the conversation, but keen to bring in Bob Trojan as well, if Bob's on the line, to just sort of wrap things up really, and what we've heard today, and sort of the key takeaways, I suppose. So yeah, it'd be good to hear from you first.
Great. Thank you, Harriet. And wow, what a great bunch of panels. I mean, this was a very deep and rich conversation, and I'm delighted to be here. And so what brings me here is that like Camilla, I am a Sherpa of the ABAC APFF data ecosystem workstream. And I also have an advisory firm that works on cross-border data sharing issues around the world. And so what spoke to me today from our conversation, our discussion, really was, from the very beginning, when Kobsak-san said really the most important word, and that is trust. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about how to build trust. And really, it's very important to do it from a whole economy approach. And that there's really three components, three parallel paths here that we're talking about trust. And that is the technical side of things, where the standards can happen, the operational infrastructure, where we spoke about like the scalable onboarding, and then finally the regulatory and legal infrastructure. And we didn't even, I was surprised, no one said GDPR today. And so we've got these kind of baked in governmental data privacy laws that are kind of the yin and the yang of innovation, but safety. And so I think Camilla also at the very beginning kind of drew the roadmap, kind of connected the dots, which was, we have data and we know who has the data. Generally, those are the payments people. So data connects to payments, payments connects to trade, and then finally trade creates prosperity. And nowhere is that greater than on the SMEs, who are really driving the economies. And we heard from a number of the speakers today about how within economies, specific economies like India, how their work really fosters innovation in SMEs. And we heard from Nelixa, who really, I think, tied it all together. What this is, what is open data, and just like Kobsak-san said, trust. Her big word that really spoke to me was transformation. And so what are we transforming from and to? So we're transforming from data in many different places that is not shareable, that is not trustable, and using that so that it is trustable and it is shareable, and creating enablement and empower and innovation through competition and sustainable development and financial inclusion. And, that stuff is worth fighting for. Now, the various panels, we talked about in the first panel, AML, CFT, anti-money laundering, and, one of the data points that really speaks to me that we didn't hear today was how much money laundering does anti-money laundering catch? And the answer is sadly very little. In fact, it's about 1%. So that means that 99% of money laundering is successful. And so that means that we have really quite a long way to go to do proper anti-money laundering. And so we need standards there and trustable data to share. We need trustworthy AI. And Dion said, and full disclosure, Dion and I work on that topic together and have just published with the ADBI on trustable AI and how that can be used for regulatory and reg tech and supervisory technology. And what my work group has been working on the last year or so was touched on in the first panel, which is data and privacy enhancing technologies. And that's how do we do all this in a safe, shareable way? And those privacy enhancing technologies really are the key, one of the keys to doing that. The problem with data enhancing, privacy enhancing technology is that they're expensive and they're hard. And so regulatory complexity needs to be simplified was another topic I heard, another point I heard. And I really want to give Holly full credit on pointing out what she called those boring trade agreements. And I'm really excited about an upcoming boring trade agreement that has just been kicked off by ASEAN, which is the DIFA, the Digital Economy Framework, which was just kicked off earlier late last year. And I'm really excited about what they could do there that could really help what we've talked about here. So the second panel, really what I took from there was that we've been talking about financial data. You got open banking, which becomes open finance. And the difference between those two is the non-financial data and the connecting of those two, kind of the identifiers with the metadata, the data about the data about the people. And that, the asymmetry of data we have out there is really what's part of the problem, is that, the big, powerful forces have the data, and the small, not so powerful ones need it. And that asymmetry is what's causing the part of the problem. And then another word I heard a lot of, which I really believe in, is really the opposite of centralized, and that's federated. And the federation of data, the federation of tamper-proof data, the federation of these single sources of truth, I think really, is where we're going to end up. And the debate about the roles of the private sector versus the public sector really came through a lot in people's comments today. And I think where hopefully we end is that we'll be private sector led and public sector supported, as I think you might have said, Harry, it was enable but don't prescribe. That's kind of the way to do it. Trust yet verify kind of thing. And principles-based regulation as opposed to detailed specifics. And then finally at the end, I heard, how do we reduce friction? The friction that we have, particularly in the anti-money laundering and the CFT, the friction doesn't work. So how, so we have a lot of opportunity to not mess things up really bad by reducing the friction, because the friction causing stuff stinks. So the big opportunity is here, and growing open finance, going towards open finance, not open banking. And I really appreciated the Indian perspective about, where do you find this data? The tax people have the data. And so, that's where, if you look at, the places that had like the original kind of, digital ID and such, all of that was paid for by the taxing people. And so I think that's masterful, to really, kind of use data judo of, using the government data to really get to the smart, scalable, federated, trustable data. And then the final thing I heard was that this is a slow journey. And so, the bottom line is this, what we're all talking about here today, is important, it's hard, it's complex. I mean, we're talking about AI, we're talking about RegTech, we're talking about supervisory technology, we're talking about federated stuff across borders. But I also heard that it's worth it. The SMEs are driving the economy. And what we talked about here today will really, I think, give those SMEs the environment to help succeed, particularly on a cross-border perspective. So that's why I got out of it. So thank you to all the panels and Harriet for your moderation. It was really an awesome discussion.
Thanks, Bob. And yeah, thank you for just so eloquently summing up your thoughts of the panels today. That's really helpful, especially for me, because I was talking so much. So getting your summary was great. And I think I agree with a lot of the things you said. And one of the things, I feel like the hypothesis we started with, we're very definitely onto something here. Like there is real scope for open data frameworks to help in this space. They're definitely not going to solve this problem and the frictions of cross-border trade, but there's real potential there if these frameworks are designed in sort of that foundational enabling way with that flexibility to help reduce the friction that we see today. I'm very conscious of time. I don't know, Camilla, whether you sort of wanted to move to closing remarks now, or whether you had any additional things to add.
Thank you, Bob, and Harriet, especially thank you to you for keeping it together for almost 2 hours. Very important person in all the work we're doing is Julius Caesar Perennis, also well known as JC. He keeps us all working hard and moving the dial, which is very important. So I would like to hand over to JC to say a few words, and then I will just close with one remark that stood out to me. So hang on until after JC, and I'll give you that one before we call it a day. JC, over to you.
Well, that was a very fruitful discussion. So congratulations, everyone. As our APFF chair mentioned in his opening remarks, open data systems need to be designed to fit the specific conditions in each market. And at the same time, they need to be based on commonly agreed principles in order to avoid our region's fragmentation into isolated digital islands. And as we've heard today, there is a role for open data to promote financial inclusion and expand access to finance for MSMEs, and particularly to enable them to engage more fully in Asia-Pacific cross-border trade. And today's discussions highlighted several important points, which thankfully Bob had masterfully summarized, so I don't need to summarize them myself. This year, the APEC Finance Ministers process under the leadership of Peru's Ministry of Economy and Finance has included open finance in its list of priority issues. A workshop will be held on this topic next week in Peru, and ABAC has been asked to make a presentation on the guiding principles that we finalized last year. So we hope to incorporate into that presentation the key insights that have come out of today's discussions. It is our expectation that the outcomes of the workshop will be translated into decisions of the finance ministers when they meet at their annual meeting in Lima this coming October. We are hopeful that the topic of open finance and open data will gain more visibility in the region after the ministerial meeting, and that decision and policymakers will look at this issue with greater interest. creating new opportunities for collaboration between government and industry. And so we hope that our network of collaborators in the private sector and international organizations will remain willing to collaborate with the public sector and relevant APEC working groups in advancing them toward implementation. In closing, let me thank the Emerging Payments Association Asia for co-organizing this webinar with us, as well as our colleagues in ABAC and APFF for their collaboration. I would like to express our deepest appreciation to our speakers and moderators who have generously shared their precious time and knowledge with us. And I thank all the participants for joining us in this event. Building on what we have discussed today, I look forward to our continued collaboration for the development of interoperable open data systems in our region that will benefit consumers, small businesses, the industry, and our economies. So thank you all very much. I wish everyone a pleasant day and evening from me. And over to you, Camilla.
Fantastic. Thank you, JC. It's always a pleasure to work together with you and the team at APFF and ABAC.